1 week season.
Hello, OWS family. Matt, Mr. P. Rich coming to you here for bias check on week 2. Love to be with you. Had a fun week last week, kind of getting started. My name on OWS on the Discord is Matty P. You can look for me there. My handle on DraftKings is Teach Me How To. And on Twitter or X, I am Matthew Petrich 1. Feel free to shout out questions or thoughts as we get this bias check podcast going. I always try to be transparent, if I am giving you some ideas, some information, teaching in a way. So last week, I played 4 lineups. Just kind of wanted to go over what I did as I'm kind of going through and giving you guys some thoughts and advice on the slate. 3 of my lineups had stacks of the Tampa Bay Atlanta game. The other one was Cleveland. Ran a stack of Cleveland. Basically, I really liked the player block of Bijan and some combo of the Tampa Bay passing game. So I mixed and matched that in my 3 stacks. I played Debo and Pearsall on a couple rosters each. I did pretty well. I actually took down the bottom-up build, which I'm not sure I'm allowed to play anymore as a content creator. So we'll see what happens with that. I really enjoyed week 1, though, because I followed my unique thoughts. I followed it all the way through my process. I made some really tough and really good decisions looking back. And so even before games started, I knew I had a good week. How did you do? Honestly assess yourself. How did you do last week? Because it's important. If you lost, right, and you're taking it hard, this can lead to more cognitive biases. For example, you might be more likely to fall prey to recency bias, fading a player who burned you, who didn't live up to your expectations. Maybe your expectations were too lofty to begin with. So it's important to kind of think about that, or even outcome bias, right? Judging the results of something rather than the process. I know JM talked a lot last week about the Arizona stacks, and right, his reasoning is great. Well, Arizona stacks might be popular again this week. We have to consider that same reasoning as valid and not just judge the results. So again, know yourself, right? Know what mental state you are approaching this week with, how much time do you have, etc. Kind of go through the questions and be as prepared as you can before really jumping into a whole week of DFS, right? It's really as a kind of a commitment. I had been thinking about bias, and especially as I see more people talking about it in the Discord and in different places. When I first started digging into the idea of bias, I thought it was really all about my own kind of quirks as a fantasy player. I never roster players when the Giants are playing at home at MetLife Stadium. I know that there are some issues with the win, that they were resolved, that they're, might still be there. I just have sort of written them off all throughout my career as a DFS player. Okay. Another one, I rarely like to pay up at quarterback, right? No matter the slate, it's just something I don't do. Those are things I don't feel good about. But here's the key distinction, right? Those aren't necessarily biases. They're preferences. They are even strategies, parts of my strategy, right? Or even habits, if I don't think about them as much. A bias is different. A bias is when our decision-making gets pushed in a certain direction without us realizing it. When our brain is nudging us toward choices that don't always line up with logic, with the data. If I fade the Giants at home because I've looked at the numbers, I have, and I have some doubts, but all right. That's a preference. If I fade them, if I looked at the numbers, it's consistently a bad spot, right? That's a preference of mine. If I fade them simply because I remember one ugly game, and that memory sort of is stuck with me, right? That's a bias. So over time, I realized it's not about recognizing my own biases really or preferences. It's about spotting the general opportunities where bias is likely to creep in on a slate on a week, right? Not just my biases, but the whole player pool. So that's where I think we have an advantage. For example, right, a player burns everyone on a primetime game. The next week, people tend to overreact. They tend to fade them. Dak Prescott. I think if you watch the game, people have different ideas of how he did, but his numbers were not great. His DFS score was not great. Are we going to fade him this week because of that? Or if a rookie, I think Emeka Egbuka has one huge breakout, right? Suddenly ownership spikes like he's going to be the next superstar. So these are classic spots where bias does show up. And here's the good part, right? If you can recognize those moments, you can actually leverage other people's bias. You don't have to eliminate bias entirely, right? You can use it as a tool. It's not always bad. If the field is overconfident, maybe I want exposure to the other side, the overlooked side. Again, it's similar to a lot of different areas of life. When other people are scared off, maybe we buy low. When it's up too high, maybe it's time to sell. So bias really creates this inefficiency that we can sort of take advantage of. Last week, we talked about a lot of different biases. One of the main ones we talked about was novelty bias in rookies. This idea that because we've never seen the ceiling, right, it's sort of infinite. Because they've never disappointed us, they never will. Right? That's such a fallacy in life as well. But so last week, Egbuka had 39% ownership in some of the contests I was in. I had said, a ceiling game for him might be something like 8 targets, 6 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown. That's actually what Chris Godwin put up last year in week 1. And Egbuka went 4 for 6, 67 yards, 2 TDs, ended up being pretty important piece for lineups this week. It was a good play. I played him. I played him as part of stacks. And I was not shy about the way I was playing him. However, I wasn't tempted to play him as a one-off because I thought there were other players that could, attract more targets. And Egbuka really showed up with the 2 touchdowns. So good for him. Some of the other rookies, Ted McMillan, he had 5 for 9, 68 yards, 21% owned. Travis Hunter, 6 for 8, 33 yards. He was 6% owned. And some of the other rookies whose results are not right next to me right now, Golden, 5%, Jonty, 4%, Tyler Warren, 6%, and Fannin, who we'll talk about, at 0.5%. So again, generally rookies struggle to get going. A lot of people struggle in week 1. So especially it's no surprise that rookies would. But congratulations if you did roster Egbuka. He did manage to give us a good score. I want to point out that last year, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors were very highly owned in week 1. They did poorly. Again, Egbuka and Ted McMillan were highly owned in week 1. And Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. exploded in week 2 last year with 30 points apiece. Rome Odunze waited until week 3 to get over 20 points. Brock Bowers and Brian Thomas Jr. Reached their sort of initial emergence in week 5. So going into week 2, Tet and Hunter, right? I'm sure the people who rostered them are going to experience some sort of outcome bias, right? They're going to drop, ownership's going to drop off, but they're both priced at around 5K. They received 9 and 8 targets respectively last week. They're in good matches. Don't overlook them this week, especially if their ownership drops. So I mentioned Fannin as well. He had quite a game. Again, I don't have the numbers, but was one of the top tight ends on the slate. Attracted a ton of targets and is expected to do so again this week at a low price. Primacy bias sort of states that our minds are more likely to look at a situation, a first situation, and assume that that is the standard. That despite any data to the contrary, right, that is a standard. So a lot of people rostered Njoku last week with his quarterback, with Joe Flacco. There was a lot of data that kind of supported that play, historical data. Are we to believe that because we've seen it once, and it was the first time that they played together, that Fannin is now the tight end to roster on that team? He will. I mean, I'll guarantee he'll be higher owned this week at his price. But primacy bias, if we recognize that, cautions us that, let's look at some other factors here. Let's sort of dive into this and explore this. What is the team saying about Fannin? What is going on behind the scenes with Njoku? Looking at any signs of anyone talking about injuries. I haven't looked into this, but I know that primacy bias is relevant, and I'm going to explore that situation and possibly be playing some Njoku next week instead. We talked a little bit about observer bias last week, right? The idea that people just kind of want to make easy decisions, especially when they are tasked with what seemed like an impossible decision. Everyone was saying, right, last week's slate, week one, there's no certainty, embrace the uncertainty. Well, we are not great at embracing uncertainty. People like making easy decisions. So a lot of people played the wide receiver one and opposing wide receiver one combos, right? We saw that with Ibuka and Drake London. We saw that with Brian Thomas Jr. and Tet. Attracted a lot of ownership. I'm sure a lot of people stacked those two. Again, that's an easy decision. I'll stack one wide receiver with the other. It kind of makes logical sense. But if you look at the correlation numbers, that's actually sort of a weak positive correlation. If the game environments have high scores, it could work out in your favor. But I do think a lot of people sort of fell into that with all of the tough decisions. Those were some of the easy decisions. And I would encourage you this week, right? We're going to have the Dallas game with two great wide receivers, right? CeeDee Lamb and Malik Neighbors. A lot of people who stack that game, that's the easy stack, right? People like easy decisions. So that'll be high owned. You can probably gain some leverage off that if you go a different way. Brian Thomas Jr. and Jamar Chase will likely be a high owned grouping this week with one of the highest total games on the board. So recognize that's a very easy way to build. QB wide receiver actually has a much stronger correlation, right? Maybe it's okay. Even if you like the game, maybe it's okay to leave one side alone. Have a reason, though. Have a reason. Jamar Chase costs too much, I can't stomach playing the Giants ever. So something to think about. Again, another thing from last week, and I love this sort of section because as I was putting it together, I realized that we're also looking ahead. Every time we're talking about last week, we're looking ahead. Let's not fall into the trap that other people fell into. Let's not let these biases sort of take hold of us. So we talked about roles that we think we know. I specifically talked about Daniel Jones. I did not play Daniel Jones. If I had played enough lineups, I definitely would have. He was 5% owned, scored 29 points, and Indianapolis dominated that game. It was well within reason, right, to think that a quarterback going to a new team, with a different coaching system, with skills, might be a different player. So I do think going forward, I do think that is not a fluke. We have to look at Daniel Jones as a viable quarterback. Right? Roles we think we know. Justin Fields. I think a lot of people knew that Justin Fields had the potential to be good, but not against Pittsburgh. Also scored 29 points. So maybe we need to be looking at Justin Fields again as one of those players with a ceiling that's slate winning, and at low prices or low ownership. We need to be thinking about them. Roles we think we know: Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet. Is it possible that it's a split backfield, or is Zach Charbonnet taking over? Again, we don't know a lot about that. In subsequent weeks, Kenneth Walker might be the back to own. But again, we thought we knew that, and that's up in the air. So we'll kind of keep looking at situations like that. We thought we knew, or this is a little different, right? Players we wrote off because of their 2024 performance. Deebo Samuel. Again, I know OWS didn't write this guy off. OWS was all over him. But Deebo Samuel was only 8% owned in such a strong matchup. He will not be only 8% owned going forward. Tyreek Hill was 14% owned. I assumed that people had written him off from his 2024 performance. Obviously not. He was 14% owned in my tournament. I'm guessing that people may be writing him off more as we go. Maybe that's the right move, but I'll talk a little bit later about this Miami team. All right. Moving on again, primacy bias. I think we got into that. We got into that a little bit with the rookies, right? With Fannin. Yeah, primacy bias. Thank you. Recency bias. So recency bias is kind of obvious, but again, when we talk about biases, we're talking about things that the mind really doesn't pick up on. So when we talk about it, it's obvious, but if you don't talk about it, it's not so obvious. Trevor Lawrence was 18% owned last week. He missed a ton of throws, especially to Brian Thomas. Recency bias would cause us to overreact. I am not yet victory lapping Trevor Lawrence. I did not draft him in best ball. I did not play him last week. It was a tough decision to not play him. But I just haven't seen a lot from him, and I'm not willing to just trust a coach sort of in week one, and regardless of the pieces that he has. So I'm not going to victory lap Trevor Lawrence, but I'm also not going to overreact to one bad performance. All right. This week, in fact, is very tempting to roster Jacksonville players. The Lions offense, right? Again, recency bias would cause us to overreact to us. Is it going to be like the Miami of 2024, right? They lost their offensive coordinator. They have no run game now. They have no offense. We can't overreact to that. I think find a different reason if you're not going to play them this week. Have a different reason. Tua and Miami, right? Tua is 6% owned, but some of those Miami wide receivers were, again, they had a bad 2023. They came out, very poor on offense and defense. But let's not overreact. Miami actually only had 6 possessions as an offense, and 3 of them ended in turnover. The average for like a low scoring game is 8 to 9 possessions, and 10 to 12 is more normal. So if they have double their possessions this week, I think we'll see a different Miami. I think that's just not enough of a sample to really judge them. And then I don't think anyone is overreacting to Pittsburgh and New York Jets. Maybe in the sense of, I can just play the lowest total game and stack it up, and that's a good idea. It's not always a good idea. But if you had looked sort of deeper into this game, and I think OWS someone had talked about this. Pittsburgh changes their defense based on a mobile quarterback. And they just could not stop the run, and they couldn't get the Jets off the field on third downs. Both teams were nearly perfect in the red zone. Odds of a game like that happening again, right, if we played it out 100 times, are not good. So again, let's not overreact to Pittsburgh and New York Jets and think that these are the highest scoring teams in the league this year. I think that's obvious, but maybe it's not. All right. Moving forward, before I end by actually telling you to check your bias this week, right? Maybe kind of rudely to some of you. I just want to take a quick look at sort of the state of the positions. Because outside of stacks, playing running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, before as part of my process, I like to kind of review what I'm looking for. And I think that's valuable, because if I know what I'm looking for, I'm less likely to get sort of distracted by the biases. And if a bias sort of points me in a different direction, as long as I know what I'm looking for and what I want to find in these positions, I find I can stick to it a little bit more. So again, outside of stacks, with running backs, I am looking, and I think a lot of people are looking for someone who gets a lot of volume, right, and has a good price. So just reminding ourselves of that. Wide receivers, something I wanted to just note. There were 11 players with 10 or more targets in the first week, which is very much in line with expectations. Last year, the average was 11.7. Players had 10 plus targets on any week. I thought that was interesting because as I was kind of looking at games, I just wanted to. I'm sort of checking in a sense of, is the usage for wide receivers, what are some of the highs we can expect? What are some of the lows on any given week? Should I be playing running back in the flex, wide receiver in the flex, tight end in the flex? So let's kind of look at what we're looking at for positions and what we have with these positions. So I guess wide receiver, in some sense, I couldn't get a good read on yet. So still waiting a little bit for more information there. And then tight end. There's going to be 3 popular guys this week. I think at tight end, it's always important to recognize that we're targeting separator scores. A lot of the tight ends will score such middling amount of points unless they score a touchdown. So we're really looking for separator scores. This week, a lot of guys will be playing Johnson from New Orleans. His QB had 46 passes. He's going to get volume, but his quarterback, who's not a very good passer, passed 46 times. I'm not sure if that's going to continue. So Fannin, again, primacy bias would tell us that Fannin is the guy on Cleveland now, and ignore Njoku. I'm going to kind of spend a little more time making that decision. And then Tyler Warren. I have nothing bad to say about him or anything about biases. What happened on the field and who the team is say a lot about Tyler Warren. Guys getting targets, Trey McBride, right, Hunter Henry, Sam Laporta, they were all getting a lot of targets in week 1. They can always pop for a separator score. So again, at tight end, that's kind of what we are looking for. We lost a few tight ends this week to injury, so finding those separator scores is going to be tougher. All right. So to close this week, let us check your biases. Kyler Murray. I know Kyler Murray is not is not hugely supported by OWS in general. I think there are some people with some strong opinions on Kyler Murray. And I get it as part of game stacks, right? We'll put Kyler Murray in there. But there's going to be a strong bias after week one when they were in a good position to do something, and they kind of had a very moderate scoring game, nothing overwhelming in the DFS streets. But for 5 games last season, you would have been very happy with Kyler Murray's price, which I think is $6K this week. And the best part about him to remember is that we know his stacking partners. So whatever bias we have about Kyler Murray, that he can't, it has to do with news over the summer of him not being able to throw over his linemen, of him not wanting to run. So there's a lot of bad news for him. That's negativity bias, and negativity bias is really difficult to sort of shed. So let's look at some positive with him, right? Again, 5 games last season, you'd be happy with his price. And we know his stacking partners. JM made a great case for Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Trey McBride, playing the 3 of them together and knowing that on a large portion of weeks, or at least a high percentage of weeks, more than is possible by sort of choosing random players, one of them would hit for a valuable DFS score. So let's not forget Kyler Murray this week. Let's check our bias and be open to playing him. And then with Miami, right? I think we have to check our bias again with Miami this week. A lot of people were saying before the season, the vibes were bad. Now I imagine it's that Miami is cooked, right? But they are going home to play in their home stadium that often tilts in their favor early in the season. Other teams are sort of stuck on the sideline with the sun beating down on them. The highs are going to be in the upper 80s this week with humidity. So it's possible that the physical demand on New England is going to open some things up for the speedy Miami players. Right, Miami, again, only had 7 possessions. The starters played in 6 of them. They had 3 turnovers. So 3 of those possessions ended in turnover. 46 total plays, right? I think we can expect a lot more from Miami this week. And let's check our biases, and let's be willing to play them if the field is not. All right, OWS fam, I will see you in the Discord this week. It looks like we have some props deals to get going on. Very successful week last week. You can turn that $9 subscription for 1 week into something more than that. All right. Have a great week. And again, figure out who you are and what you can do this week. Play within your limits and see you at the top of the leaderboards.